So I will offer the fourth round of thanks. It really has been such a pleasure to work with IFPRI on these topics and to be part of this publication that will be coming out next year. As Ruth suggested, I'm going to be talking about how we can take some of these findings and to work with some of the data in ways that actually can have an impact on projects as they operate on the ground and are funded by different types of donors and even by private enterprise at different times. And I'm here today also with my colleague here, Christina Manfrey, who wasn't able to come today, but she has been part of the project from the beginning. So when we started working on value chains, which was about in 2008, 2009, we heard things. They weren't exactly stated as myths, but we heard things that we wanted to question. And one of them was that you really didn't need to address gender issues in value chain analysis at all. So it shows you how far we've come in just a few years. We also heard that women really aren't involved in the value chain and thinking about the whole link from farm to fork, but that women are only involved as producers. And so that was another reason why it wasn't necessary to look at them throughout the chain. And then we heard as interest became greater about looking at issues of value chains and gender, we heard that you only had to deal with the value chains where women were already the high performers. So take horticulture as a good example. And you didn't have to deal with gender issues in a value chain for maize or for wheat or something where women were not so obvious. But we would like to suggest that, in fact, it's important to look at gender issues in all value chains. And the reasons why it matters have been framed in two usually opposing ways. One is the business case for looking at gender issues, and that involves reasons dealing with efficiency. And there are a lot of very good reasons why you would want to address gender issues. We have found that when women have greater incentives to work on the farm, that you increase productivity. When they are given inputs, as Terry had explained, you can definitely increase productivity. And when you increase productivity, you often are able to also improve the profitability of the farm. When you decrease discrimination, you are also able to increase efficiency. And there are a lot of ways in which building women into the value chain help to increase the markets so that you can expand those markets for the fertilizer or the inputs because women are now buying them to work on their own plots, or you can actually build market opportunities with new crops that women are working with. So there are really a very wide number of reasons why a business case can be made for looking at gender. And there's also the social justice case for equity, so that you want to improve the work conditions for women who are involved in the value chain in all kinds of work. You want to make sure that you're adhering to international conventions and to national laws. Oftentimes you have situations in the constitutions of different governments which proclaim gender equity, but which are then not carried through into the agricultural sector. And when you look at the development case, you can take those two pieces together and make an argument for really transformational efforts to integrate gender issues into value chains. This graph shows 4 quadrants, but we're focusing on the upper right quadrant, where we have mutually supportive and transformative development, where you're achieving both gender equality as well as economic growth and integrated value chains. And our goal here is that by being intentional about the way in which you define and design these value chains, you can achieve the two goals. So I would like to suggest 4 points that when you are designing value chains, you take these points in mind and you can help to achieve that goal. The first is to recognize that the value chains don't stand alone as some kind of economic process that's totally divorced from the rest of the world, but they are embedded in a social context and that they are built on existing social relations. We know that households and markets interact. We know that the kind of work that men and women do are defined by different kinds of social norms. And we know that the institutions as well as the laws also reflect the norms of the location. Second, we look to understand the ways in which gendered factors shape the determinants of participation. And this speaks very much to the issues that both Ruth and Agnes raised. If you take land as an example, and women are underrepresented in land ownership, even if not as much as we might have thought a few minutes ago, we know that if you have an agricultural project, you need to have some kind of land access. You may not need to own it, but you do need to have access if you're going to grow something. Even with poultry, you do need at least some area where you're going to be growing, raising your chickens. So norms and laws around land ownership are very important as a determinant. Similarly, social capital is also very important. And we don't know enough yet about those groups that Ruth mentioned in terms of what types of group actually promotes the kind of social capital to participate in value chains, or to what extent of interaction is necessary. Second, we need to understand, this is really important, and I think the area where we know the least at this point, about the kind of gender dimensions of benefit systems and governance systems. Because a lot of work in value chains involves creating producer groups or trader groups, marketing groups, and to structure those groups in ways with bylaws that support participation by women and leadership by women is very important. And we simply don't have a lot of data on that topic. We also need to recognize that women often may participate very heavily but don't get benefits, whereas men are often in a situation where they may control the land or control the capital, and they do get benefits from value chain participation, from value chains, but do not have to provide, for example, the labor. And the fourth point is to recognize that value chains also change those social norms. So I think we have accepted very much that first point, that the value chains are embedded in a social context, but we know less about the ways in which value chains actually change the relationships. So what's next? If we do those four things, what are some areas in which we can look to the future? I think one of the important areas, and one in which IFPRI as well as other parts of the CG are very involved in right now, is developing value chains that support good nutritional outcomes. And there are several projects that are working on that, but what would that mean? It would mean looking at a crop not only for its economic benefit, but also for ways in which it can improve diets. We also need to know more about value chains that can support climate-smart agriculture, so that we start to shift the kind of production and marketing that we're doing in ways that don't harm the environment, but can support a good adaptive processes. And finally, as Agnes and Ruth have both mentioned in different ways, it's very important that we look at ways to develop value chains that help to increase the accumulation of women's assets. And I think we're now at a point where we can turn to our question and answers. Thank you very much.